We have our presentation today with the forum speaking on literacy and the ELL student. With us today we have Dr. Sal and Professor Alicia.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Good evening.
All right. Just a few quick questions for our viewers. Let's see. We have question number 1 coming in from a particular viewer. What factors in content literacy are most challenging for ELL and struggling readers?
I would say that the vocabulary, I think that ELL readers initially are exposed to narrative text, and when they transition to expository text, they may have difficulty with language, with the content and the vocabulary that they have not been exposed to before. So I think that vocabulary and fluency, which is very different than when you're reading narratively, would definitely be a problem in content literacy, and the teacher would need to address that.
All right. Sounds proficient, I suppose. One more question. You are familiar with the research of Lejeune, are you not?
Yes,
in
I am.
immigration?
Yes, I am.
He had a question, or he posed a question about students' voices. I think the question was, whose voices have not been heard? What is your interpretation on that, ma'am?
Well, I think Lejeune came up with a brilliant idea, and he actually decided in the teaching of the social studies curriculum to turn over the curriculum to the students. And in doing so, he actually gave the students voices. So not only did he believe that his own students' voices and their families and their experiences may be missing from the immigration experience in the group that they were studying, but also other groups such as the Haitians and the Cambodians. Too many times we often focus on European immigration when we are teaching social studies and immigration matters. But he allowed the students to choose the groups that they wanted to study, which gave those immigrants a voice through their own voice, and in doing so actually gave them a choice and a voice in his own classroom and had them internalize the lessons and really walk a mile, as they say in the moccasins, of the immigrants they study.
Brilliant response, brilliant. Dr. Sal, would you care to piggyback on that? What are you?
What am I?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
That's a good question.
Okay.
I often wonder, but I am an African American male, believe it or not. Having to be in America, not responsible for being here, but trying to enjoy the fruits and blessings of what this great country offers us. Fortunate enough, my father died in the Korean War.
Okay.
To no avail to myself. And because of his death, I was able to go to school with a scholarship that was awarded by the Department of Defense. And over the years, because I applied myself and took advantage of this situation, I was able to also seek a graduate degree at Appalachian State. And as you can tell, my mom tongue is that of a country boy, because I am from North Carolina, believe it or not, raised by grandparents because my mother was trying to seek a better life up north. That's who I am in a nutshell. Okay. And now I would like to know, who are you?
Who am I? Well, that question was posed for those viewers who are just tuning in, not just a random question, but because it was featured in that particular research, an article looking into immigrants and how they felt that their voices were not particularly being heard, and they started writing with poetry, different aspects of literature, expository writing. To answer that question, Dr. Sal, who am I? I am an African-American female, of course, first and foremost. Also, various backgrounds. My mother's Guyanese by birth. My dad's Nigerian. So I have that background. I've been to both countries. I've lived in Guyana for a period of time. So I guess it would depend on where I am and who I'm with that would interpret who I am. I'm also a wife and mother.
I think that's an interesting question, because I think that as we were discussing off camera, people may say they may begin with their nationality, they may begin with their culture, they may begin with their religion, they may begin with their gender. So it is amazing how we define people and how people define us, and I think that's really what Lejeune, to bring it full circle, was getting at. His students, there was a convenience store in the corner near the school that his students often visited, and his students had always referred to the merchant as Chinese, because to them all Asian people were Chinese, when in fact I believe the merchant might have been Korean. So by the end of the unit...
Cutting you off, some students they said Yang.
Oh, okay. Very good. Thank you. So what they learn actually is that you don't lump all people together, and people are here and they've undergone an extreme amount of struggles to get here. What may seem as clannish behavior or shy behavior or odd behavior, I think they learn cultural aspects of particular immigrant groups, maybe why some of them tend to stick together. And instead of shunning or making fun of the way people talked, I think by the end of the unit they had a whole new respect for people that were different from themselves and viewed them as freedom fighters or as people who sacrificed or who had people that were tortured or murdered to actually get to this country and share in the American dream. So I think they had a whole new found respect for their own culture and heritage and for the groups that they researched themselves and for the other groups that other students had researched, and even groups that were not presented that may have not been included in the unit, but certainly were groups that they encountered perhaps on a day-to-day basis in school.
Okay. Speaking of a respect for heritage, why do you think Lejeune chose to have poems featured as opposed to the expository writing or some of the essays or even the interior monologues that the students did during the unit? Why did he choose to feature poems in the article?
Well, I think, Dr. Sal, I'll defer to you, but I think that poetry actually conveys feelings that sometimes cannot be captured with expository text. It can capture smells and sounds and historical aspects or the hopes and dreams and wishes of people while still conveying information. So I think that in writing across the curriculum, that poetry is not something you'd often find in social studies, but I thought it was a brilliant maneuver because not everyone wants to write an essay or a story. Some people might want to write 10 lines and convey what they ordinarily would have had to take 10 pages of text, properly formatted text to convey. So I think it's just another avenue for students to really express what may not be able to be otherwise expressed in the written word. Would you agree?
I totally agree with you. To pick back on what you said, I feel that most students need the opportunity, as Dr. L said, to express themselves in a free atmosphere. And this free lifestyle gave them this opportunity through the portrait of expression for other students to see how they could speak the different vernaculars and the different monotones, i.e., regardless of whether they were Chinese and Korean or African American. So that point of view, I think, was very much expressed with the portrait concept of the students having an opportunity to freely express themselves, especially to their other students.
Okay. Dr. Sal, are you familiar with Lejeune's PRC2 concept?
I am, but I feel that my fellow comrade here would expound on that a little more for me.
I think that as Sal and I were discussing earlier, that the English language learners and struggling readers have seem to have far more success when they are in much smaller groups. In this particular exercise, PRC2, I believe it was called, there were only 2 students, and they were often matched on their ability level. And I think that, Sal, I'm sure you would agree that the students, did you see a change when we discussed this in their demeanor, the students that may have been shy,
that's correct.
Now,
Because
confidence?
and the other part of that study demonstrated that when students talk to one another, they feel that they are on the same level.
Absolutely.
So their shyness and their communication is much more freer, and they're not really afraid of making any mistakes.
So you would say that those are some of the advantages of partner reading?
Oh, definitely.
And I think also opportunity. When you have a class of 30, you are competing with 29 other children to speak, where you're with 2, you have a 50% chance at a minimum of speaking and throwing ideas out there. And if you feel silly about a particular idea, you only end up feeling silly in front of one person. So I think that really gives students an ability to gain confidence, an ability to gain more opportunity to speak, and to check for understanding where a person, particularly in ELL, may get lost in the mix of people bouncing off ideas in larger groups. I think that they gain the confidence and the competency when they're paired in smaller groups like that.
Right. One final question for our panelists. How can attention to the visual and graphic features in informational text help ELL students comprehend complex text materials?
To start off answering that question, I feel that as we use the acronym OJT next door, it's almost like on-the-job training, because not only are the kids receiving some information verbally, but it's being demonstrated through the graphics and the visual arts. And it gives them a clearer and a better picture of whatever concept we're trying to get over to that particular student, especially a student who may have an impediment with speech. And when they see this demonstrated the visual concept here, I'm sure that that brings home the point even more better because it's being demonstrated.
Exactly. I think I'm completely in agreement with that and believe that the particular visual features of textbooks are very important. Sometimes they are overlooked by some students in trying to just get the information, but in fact those graphics and visuals support the text and most often the main point, because if it deserves space in the textbook to appear in the first place, it must be an important point. So I think that things like charts and italics and bold and titles absolutely directs a student's attention, and not only directs it to the important points, but also how information is presented in a logical and sequential order, particularly with subtitles or bold or italics or things blocked off in boxes. So I think that that really supports the text, and it's just like almost like a cheat sheet and added visual notes of the student. Some students are visual learners like myself. If I see it on paper, in my mind's eye, when I have to repeat the information, I can almost see where on the paper that information was and whether it was in a note on the side or in a chart or in a pie chart or a graph. So I think that really supports English language learners in particular.
All right. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we have come to the end of our segment. We would like to thank our focus panel discussion individuals, experts in their field. Dr. Sal, thank you for coming.
Thank you for having me.
Professor Alicia, thank you for coming.
Thank you very much.
And that has been Reading Matters, and I am Ginger Grant, signing off.